Welcome to the History of Ultimate in Minnesota podcast. In episode 2, James Huron sits down virtually with Robin Kunze and discusses her 30-year Ultimate career.
Hey everyone, my name is James Huron and I use him, he, his pronouns, and today we're going to be talking with Robin Kunze. Robin, why don't you introduce yourself and give a brief overview of your Ultimate career, and then we'll dive into the details.
Sounds good. My name is Robin Kunze. I go by she and hers, and I've been playing Ultimate Frisbee for a little while.
A little while is maybe an understatement, but let's get into that. So when did you start playing Ultimate?
So I started playing Ultimate in 1989. So it's been about just over 30 years. And I, in 89, Ultimate existed basically only on a couple college campuses. And in Minnesota, I think Carleton at the time for women was the only one. And so I went there as a freshman, and I had done other sports in high school and was doing other sports in college and planning to do that. And I had, at Carleton, all of the floors had their own co-ed team.
Okay.
And there were a couple of guys on the floor who I think were really competitive, and they were also super social. And so they kept coming and asking me and telling me that I really should come on play and that I should try Ultimate Frisbee. And so eventually after a couple of times, I was like, well, okay, that sounds good. So I went out and played a couple of co-ed games, which was really fun. And then they told me about the women's team, and I went out to the first practice, and there were probably 12 women there total. And we played for at least 3 hours and played the entire time without stopping. And I was so tired by the end, which to me, that's the essence of a great workout. I was hooked. That was it. One practice and I was in.
Wow, cool. So you mentioned you played other sports in high school and you had planned on playing other sports in college. What were the other sports that you were looking at for college?
So in high school, I ran track, did a high jump, and I swam, and I played basketball. And then when you go to the college season for women, you had to choose between basketball and swimming because they were then in the same season. So I chose to go with swimming. And the swimming season actually was in the winter, so I wasn't doing anything in the fall when the co-ed Ultimate was going on. But at the time, I thought it was really funny that these people kept asking me to go play because I thought it was, I didn't know anything about it. I thought it was kind of silly. In my mind, the thought was, well, I'm going to go do a real sport, which of course was swimming. But then I went to this first practice and realized that first practice was harder than just about any swimming workout I've ever done.
Cool. So was it the intensity of the workout that really hooked you, or because Ultimate has some unique aspects compared to other sports? Was there anything else about Ultimate that hooked you?
I think the people that were there, it's a combination of not only do they love doing this so much that they're willing to do it until they almost can't walk anymore. Although actually at the time they were in better shape than I was. So they seemed actually to be able to walk just fine. It was only me. But it's that they enjoyed it so much and they really loved being around each other. They were the kind of people that I really wanted to just be around. They were respectful. They were welcoming. I think it's through the years, it's everything that I've come to value about Ultimate was there from that very first practice.
Okay. Wow. That's very cool. So you started playing as a freshman in Carleton in 1989. You continued Ultimate throughout all 4 years?
I did. Yep. So at the time, and I think this is kind of true for the other women's teams, the team size was determined, it was 13, and that was because that's how many people you could fit in a van that the college would rent to you.
Yeah.
And then there were 2 what they called alternates. And so, if someone couldn't go, then you would hop in. But, it was 13 people, and you went and then played a 2-day tournament with, 5 games the first day, 4 games the second day, which worked just fine for me also, again, because it's outside all day long. And I think there's something so wonderful about being able to play for so long that you literally can't remember what you just did. when you walk off the field and you can't remember what happened. You know that you scored somehow, but you have no idea how it happened because you're just too tired to remember.
Yeah.
But yeah, in those days, that was par for the course with 13 people. There was no other way to do that. I remember realizing kind of how shocked I was later on to realize that I had a good number of teammates throughout college and really throughout all the years that they didn't like to run. If you asked them to just go on a 2, 3, 4, 5 mile run, they did not like to run. And I couldn't understand how that's possible because you play Frisbee all
Right.
day for 2 days in a row. And all it is running. So how is it possible that you don't like to run? But I think there is a big difference between going for a run and playing ultimate Frisbee, clearly.
Yeah, that actually sounds a lot like me in college. I hated running, loved ultimate.
Yeah. Yep.
So you got hooked with ultimate at Carleton. How long did it take you to start exploring like the Minnesota ultimate scene outside of Carleton?
Well, so in the 80s and 90s, it was very easy to know what the ultimate scene was, even across the entire nation, because there were so few colleges that played. So in the Midwest region, there was a Michigan team, the Chicago team, Minnesota, and Madison. And it was that was it for the 4 teams. And we drove to all the tournaments. And so once it was time to start heading out of college, those were the teams you would go to, or if you wanted to try and go out to one of the coasts, because it was Godiva out on the East Coast. And it was blanking on the West Coast team. Boy, it'll come to me eventually. But it was the 2 of those teams every year in the finals, probably for 3 years running. No, 5 to 7 years running, I think. But for me, what was I doing? I was trying to figure out what to do with my life. Like most
college stuff,
students.
yeah.
Yeah, I had one plan coming out of college, and then it changed into something else. So what I decided at that point was I was going to do pre-med stuff, and so I was going to go to the cities and go up to the U of M and do the rest of my pre-med classes, because I hadn't thought about that pathway pretty much until I graduated from college. So I already actually knew a good number of people who played on the Minnesota women's team in the cities, which at the time was Jane Eyre, spelled A-I-R. And in fact, when I was a senior in college, we would scrimmage in the spring against Jane Eyre, which was the club team, in preparation for nationals. And they were very gracious. And they actually would come down to Carleton most of the time because none of us had had cars. So in fact, I had scrimmaged against these people multiple times. There were other people who had played at Carleton who were on the team. And it was also a very small community. So you're probably no more than 16 women, maybe 20 in the cities that played ultimate at the time. So that was the team, and I knew most of the people on it already, and that's what I wanted to do. So then I moved up to the cities, and instant community, just like ultimate is really, I think, everywhere.
Yeah. So you mentioned a few times that ultimate, there just weren't that many teams back in the late 80s, early 90s. What was the general vibe of like the Twin Cities ultimate scene like? Obviously now there's a few different leagues with every season. There's levels of play at every level, different divisions. What was it like back in those, I guess, for you early days?
Yeah. So that would be in 93 is when I graduated, when I came up to the cities. At that point, there was one women's team, which was Jane Eyre, which maybe had 18 people on it. And there were 2 men's teams, the Buddha Boys, and the other team was Trash. And it kind of divided somewhat along lines of the super competitive people went to the Buddha Boys, and the like fun-loving people went to Trash. But the community was so small that, on weekends, on Sundays in particular, it was always just a default. Show up in Nokomis, 1 o'clock, and you play co-ed pickup until everyone was done playing. And it's really fun because you just show up and you can talk to people if you want to, or if you're shy, you can just go out and play and not say anything. But at the same time, here are all these young people in terms of like social outings and ways to get to know people. It was really perfect. It's interesting to look back on it now because I realized that there was a lot of co-ed play at the time, which was clearly unusual for that era. And I look now at, all the co-ed teams and how competitive they are. And, I've had different experiences throughout the years playing with men, playing some co-ed, not necessarily in the formal fall season. But it's been there since the very beginning. It's just that in the fall, we would split out into our own divisions. And most of the spring and the summer, we would go and play like a tournament in Madison, and you would just take 9 people. In fact, that was usually the craze at that point. So you'd take, 5 men, 4 women, and everyone could only have 9 people on their team.
Oh my
And you
gosh.
play a whole tournament that way.
Oh, wow.
And, you get to know people really well when you have that size of a roster.
Uh-huh. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Wow, so it sounded like a pretty tight-knit community then as well.
Yeah, definitely. Everybody knew everybody else. And also it was easy to know all the people really across the nation too, because everyone had played against everyone, and then people would move around. And I think that's still true, even though the size of Ultimate in the nation has just grown astronomically. The other thing that I think was interesting in Minnesota, even at that point, so in 93 and even a couple of years sooner than that, there was Summer League. And there were a large number of people who did not play on either, any of the club teams, but they would come out and play league. And so that larger community still existed even back then. Certainly not the spring league, summer league, fall league, winter league that we have now. And now we have the open division and the masters division. I mean, in terms of actual numbers, it's crazy how that's changed. And then you throw Goldtiment in there too.
Right.
But that kind of desire to have all these other people from the community be involved, and kind of the recruiting process that always happened very naturally from league players then being recruited onto club teams. I still see that a lot today, which I really like.
Yeah. Speaking of moving around, at some point, I think around the time period that we're talking, you ended up moving to Chicago to play with Nemesis. Can you talk a little bit about that transition and like what drove that transition and how what the difference was between the Chicago scene and the Minneapolis scene?
Yeah. So I played, just at Carleton and then with Jane Eyre for, I think it was 3 years. Yep, that's right. And we had gotten to regionals and we were in the game to go to nationals. And I think we were actually up 11-2.
Whoa.
Yep. To a game to 13. And things started to go a little bit sideways.
Oh no.
And then things went more sideways.
Oh
and
no.
then even more. And then at that point, the men's Michigan team showed up on the sideline. And needless to say, we ended up not winning that game.
Oh.
And I think what was interesting at that point is that I realized that even though we had lost that game and it was kind of a high pressure situation, still really liked it.
Mm-hmm.
I think if you have that kind of competitive nature, that even when it's deeply unpleasant, you still kind of like it.
Right. Yeah.
And so I think I knew at that point I wanted to move to a team that, even though they might, kind of by reputation might be a feistier team, maybe I'd say, than what I had been, than Jane Eyre. I thought maybe that would be a good change for me. And so what I ended up doing is I was in medical school at the time, and you have to do a research trimester during medical school. And so I specifically arranged to do my research trimester in the fall in Chicago.
Okay.
Now, as it turns out, there's lots of great places to do research in Chicago. So I did research in electrophysiology at the University of Chicago. So it was very legitimate.
Right.
And I did learn a lot, and it was a great experience there too. But I also then went and I trained and I tried out for Nemesis. And what I thought about was interesting with that team is I got there and I knew that I was kind of like a little fish in a big pond, and I was going to have to really work hard and show, what I could do. And so I was training every day, and I would do track workouts and runs and everything else. And unfortunately, I actually ended up kind of tearing up my Achilles to the point where I got, Achilles troubles that have plagued me since, which is a common theme, of course, among ultimate players who don't know how to not play. But so I played through the summer, and then we went and we played a tournament in Naperville, which I think at the time was called, I think it was still called Heavyweights. I can't remember, but it was Naperville, which was a site, the polo grounds there for many, many tournaments. And we were playing the tournament on Saturday night. We had finished playing, and I thought I hadn't played very well. And so I was talking to my friend, Rosie, also known as Michelle Boardman. And I said, wow, if I keep playing like this, I'm not going to make the team. And Rosie said, do you not know you've already made the team? It's just one of these things where, like with Ultimate, again, this kind of just family style of like, if you're here and you're with us and you're playing, why would you think anything else, other than that? So it was very interesting. But what I learned from that team is that it is entirely possible and in fact a good thing to have teammates where on the field you can yell at each other and walk off the field and still have it be completely fine. Because number one, they're yelling at you for a reason so that you can do what it is that you need to do right away in that moment, right? Because a lot of times with Ultimate, it's the only way it works. But number two, the reason that it's okay is because you know very confidently that the people that you're playing with respect you and they like you, and it is not a personality issue in any way. But they're doing that because they're that competitive and they want to kind of be able to play at that level of excellence. And I thought that was very interesting to me because, Minnesota nice. There's a little bit of truth to that. But how do you kind of strike that balance between being able to call out on what that is that needs to happen right in the moment on the field and still have that great team cohesion? And it was a really good balance.
Yeah, on Nemesis you're talking specifically?
Yep.
Cool. Yeah.
And I've had that balance on other teams as well.
Right.
But I think that was my first time where I realized you could do that and still have the team hold together.
Cool. So you stuck with Nemesis for a few years. How did those years go? Because you said you specifically went there for competition purposes.
Yes, they did. Well, so the first year, we did not make it. At that time, Nationals was set up so it was only 12 teams, and the top 2 in each pool went on to semis, and that was it. Wow. So the first year that I went, our captain, Nancy Glass, who is a very fierce, talented player, she tore her ACL, and we did not make it to the semis. The next year, we did make it to the quarterfinals, and that's when it was in San Diego. And for the people who had been there, those fields, and I think maybe this last season, I think Nationals was there again. There's kind of these big cliffs overhanging.
Yep.
Really beautiful. So that was the year that we got to play at San Diego, but then we lost the fields because people were unable to find their way to the porta potties.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so that was a little unfortunate. But that season actually was great. We ended up making it to the quarterfinals. We lost in the quarterfinals by 1 point to the team that then ended up winning Nationals that year. So, yeah. And then I played with them for 3 years. So the first year I had a trimester that I had to do research for medical school. The next year I applied for a fellowship so I could do a year of research, which I ended up going back to the University of Chicago and doing this electrophysiology research and playing on Nemesis for another season. And then the next year, which was my 4th year of medical school, I arranged to do a pediatrics rotation at Northwestern in Chicago. So I could play with them for a 3rd season.
Wow. Just a nice little combination of your budding career and your Ultimate. So
yeah, hard to say which was more important, actually. I'm pretty sure Ultimate was more important.
Yeah. But after those 3 years, I mean, did you want to go back to Minnesota, or could you stop finding excuses to keep on playing in Chicago? What happened?
At that point, I went back to Minnesota. So I'd finished medical school, and then I was doing my intern year up at Hennepin County in Minneapolis. And at the time, I didn't really have plans for Ultimate. I didn't really have anything particular in mind. But, and this always seems to be the way these teams form in Minnesota, which I think is kind of neat. But there was one of my former teammates, Jackie Ferret, also moved from Chicago to Minneapolis at that point. And then Michelle Boardman, aka Rosie, was in town. Myself, and then let's see, I'm picturing her and I can't remember. Teresa Weber was also in town, and she was a former Michigan player. And I think it was Teresa and I somehow must have played a little bit in the off season together, but we started talking about it. And, then you start talking about it, you start scheming and such. And so we looked around and said, we pinpointed Rosie and we pinpointed Jackie, and we said, you two, because Rosie's a phenomenal player. She's been in nationals and she was on Nemesis, a great player for them. Jackie, same thing. And said, we want you to start a team in Minnesota. And well, Rosie she didn't want to completely commit to that. And Jackie said she wasn't too sure. She's like, I think she was trying to pull the I'm too old card, which I personally find funny. But eventually Teresa and I just decided that, you know what, let's just put a team together. So we decided we're going to do it. And we said, Rosie and Jackie, if you want to do it with us, you let us know, but we're going to move ahead. So that's how we started Bait.
Okay.
And I was only in town for a year for my intern year. And then I went out to Virginia to do my residency. So then Bait continued for the next many years. Let's see, their last year was 2007. Let's see, 11/6/07. Nope, 2006. So 2001 to 2006, Bait was in play. And I captained the first year, and then the next year I was in Charlottesville, Virginia for residency. And I played, actually, that was the year that I played co-ed with Blue Ridge Ultimate, which was really a fantastic experience, except for one thing at Nationals, which I'll comment on later,
Okay.
which I think is very pertinent to Ultimate. And then the year after that, I went back and played Bait again, or I was going to, but I tore my Achilles.
Oh.
So I ended up sitting out that season. And then came back to Minnesota, and Bait was still going, and actually, tried out for the team, and I had torn my Achilles, and so it had healed, but I wasn't actually sure that I was going to be able to play. So that was in 2005. Mm-hmm. And then basically the rest of the years of my Ultimate career, so since 2005, it's always the same question, which is, I don't think I'm going to be able to play. My body's going to fall apart. I just don't know. But basically through sheer stupidity, you just keep playing anyway, because, until both your legs are broken, why not?
Right. Why not? So I want to ask back about Blue Ridge Ultimate. So you played women's most of your Ultimate career. The only time you mentioned that you played co-ed was just kind of in the Twin Cities Ultimate scene, when you might play pickup or go to a tournament as a co-ed team. So in that 1 year that you played club mixed, what were some differences between that and your experience with women's?
I think the biggest difference to me was it wasn't completely different, because I had played, poultry days and played a lot with men. But when you play a whole season and they're your teammates, I think the first thing that's kind of nice is with men, it's much easier they have such a big range that you can throw within, it's much more forgiving. Mm-hmm. The second thing was that if you're going to huck in the co-ed game, you better really be able to huck. Because if you think you're hucking, as soon as you put the disc up, guys can outrun that so fast. So what I found for me was that even though I had been playing very competitive women's ultimate with top level, like I would say probably one of the best female throwers in the nation, that was Amy DuVerlay on Nemesis. Coming and playing with the guys, I just changed my mindset completely, which is nothing other than throwing as well as each of my teammates is acceptable. If I'm going to play this game, then that's how I need to play. And I think that upped the game for me and really kind of pushed me to be able to develop just a greater range, a greater confidence, and also be more decisive. You don't have as much time to decide. You're either going to make that decision and do that, or you're not, especially with the hucks, because you run out of time so quickly because people can run and close that gap so quickly. Mm-hmm. I think the other thing too is, and I've known this throughout the years, it's a very kind of, I'm trying to think of the right word, ingrained thought process, or it's not really even a thought process, that when things get tight or there's a lot of pressure or there's something that really needs to happen, it's generally understood, I think, in our human culture, that it's the guy's job to do that. And when you have a successful co-ed team, I think it requires men to become aware that even though they might be faster than another person, there oftentimes are women who have a greater ability to get open, to get to the discs, to make the play than they do. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a lot of the time where men sometimes first become aware that even though I can run faster than this person next to me and I can jump higher, my best play right now is to try to hold up or move out or create that space, because that is how we as a team will win. And I think the other part about it is going back to that theme of having less time to make a decision. As a female player, you either make the decision and go in right then, or you're not going to do it all. You cannot hesitate. And so I think it's a very interesting dynamic, and it's a really wonderful thing when you have a team that works well together, just regardless. But with the co-ed, I think there's an extra challenge there. And my experience with Brew, that team was wonderful. Really enjoyed them. Bunch of, a lot of interesting personalities all on the same team. And when we won, we won the regional championship, I've never seen people so happy in my life. But of course, I'd come from a different part of the country and I didn't know the history between these teams. But yeah, they really just embraced each other and really enjoyed each other. It was a very team-oriented group. And I mean, I think personally for me, it's really fun because for whatever reason, I got to do a lot. They decided that I got to do a lot, and so that was fun too. That's always nice.
Yeah, especially being on the team for 1 year, like getting the trust of your teammates like that. So
yeah, exactly.
So after Brew, you returned to Minnesota, and then you said that you tore your Achilles, putting you out for a year.
So,
or you played big first and then tore your Achilles.
Yeah, I missed my last year in Virginia. I would have played with Bate, the Minnesota women's team again, but because I tore my Achilles, I didn't play with any team, so I missed a season.
Gotcha.
Yeah, but the reason that I wanted to go back to women's actually was it was specifically the team that we beat in the regional finals, and this is why I think that Brew was so happy. It was a team that we then ended up playing in the quarterfinals at nationals. And it was the most unspirited, distressing, disturbing game. And even one of the most, even a distressing experience kind of in my own span of life. And it was specifically the men on the other team were physically violent. They when, one guy would receive the disc, the other team would use their body momentum and just flatten them. Didn't even try to stop. And one of our lead players was playing against their lead player, and they played against each other for many years. It was so violent that at one point, our player ended up getting a big cut across his eye,
Oh, wow.
like his eyebrow.
Mhm.
So he's bleeding. And it's not just an incidental, they were both going up for the contact. He was physically, it was distressing.
Mhm.
And so once that game ended, the other team won, and I couldn't care less. At that point, I already decided if this is what Ultimate is going to be, I am never going to play Ultimate again. So, of course, at the time I was in medical school, so I went to the EMTs and I got some stuff and I stitched my teammate up.
Mhm.
But I just thought, if this is what Ultimate is, I never want to play again. And if this is what co-ed Ultimate is, then I don't want to do this ever again. And I don't think it's co-ed Ultimate. I think it's specific players that decide that that kind of behavior is okay.
Mhm.
But it was disturbing. But I love playing with my team. I've always enjoyed co-ed. But it just really pointed out to me, do I like to win? Absolutely. But the spirit of the game is what makes it a great game. And if you don't have that, nobody's going to want to play.
Right, and I could not agree with you more on that point, for sure.
Yeah.
So let's move forward then in time to 2007. Something important happened in your life, and I'm just curious if you could tell people what that was and how that changed your relationship with Ultimate.
So I had our first child in 2007. And the other thing I'll mention with Nemesis is that the captain of that team, Nancy Glass, had already had 2 children, including the second one, for which when she was 7 months pregnant, she played at nationals.
Whoa.
And it caused a big controversy, right? Because
Mhm.
it was very obvious that she was pregnant.
Mhm.
And the question then was raised, well, how is that fair or reasonable to other players? Because if they know you're pregnant, they're not going to make certain plays that they might otherwise make,
Mhm.
which I think is a valid point. But that wasn't really my concern. What I loved about it is Nancy Glass was the one that made me realize that I can have kids and I can still be everything that I think that I am, including playing Ultimate. And so once I saw that, I was like, oh, okay, well, I'm going to have a baby, but then I'm just going to keep playing Ultimate too. And so that following season, that was 2007, 2006, we had lost in the finals as bait, and then we lost the backdoor game. And then I already knew at that point that this was the time Rocket and I had finally decided that we wanted to have kids. So I kind of figured I didn't have any plans for Ultimate the next season. And so that was the season that the Minnesota women were trying to form a team. In fact, that was Jill Kiner that was doing that. But as it turned out, the Iowa women's team had more players. And so the Minnesota women joined the Iowa women. And it ended up being a very fun year. And I think there are lots of very fun stories to hear from that. But then in November, I finally had our first child. And what I was most kind of frustrated by was that I basically hadn't had Zoe yet because I had been working out the entire time that I was pregnant, doing track workouts, coming to practices, scrimmaging, doing everything. And I had specifically in medical school done a study during my OB-GYN rotation on exercise in pregnancy.
Mhm.
And so during that entire pregnancy, I was very committed to exercising and knowing full well that the studies demonstrate that you can exercise, do whatever you want. You don't have to get crazy about it, but you can be pretty aggressive and not have any adverse outcomes that are related to that. But part of me did think that since I was working out that much, that she'd probably come at least a couple weeks early, because my plan was to have her at 37 weeks and then fly down to nationals. So I wasn't going to be playing, but I could just hang out with everyone with the newborn.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, this was my first kid. I had no idea what it entailed. That would have been a crazy plan, and I'm very glad that that didn't work out.
Yeah. Okay, so you unfortunately missed nationals, but you end up having your first child, and
Right.
then because there was no Minnesota team that year, I think next year you and a few others got together and created a Minnesota team.
Yep. So that was 2008. In the springtime, I'm going to blame this completely on Jill Kiner and Bridget Daniels because they came up to me and then Sarah Solars
Mhm.
and decided that the two of us should start a women's team. And so we had probably a 3-hour conversation over dinner where Sarah and I listened, and then we tried to comment back to Jill and BK. We basically tried to turn the conversation into, why don't you guys start the team? And they, they kind of deferred with a number of different, we'll call them reasons. But so anyway, Sarah and I decided that we would go ahead with that. And at the time, I was actually 36, and I didn't realize that Sarah Solars was only 25. Wonderful individual, super mature, super funny. And we had never played together other than maybe at a couple pickups, but decided that we would go ahead and do that. And so in planning that, we would meet and then kind of come up, plan the practices and everything else. And that was the very first season of Pop. Jill Kiner was the one who came up with the name. That's important to note. And then we ended up going to nationals that year. We had another player named Alyssa Olson who came up, I think she came up with our backstory, basically, which is very creatively written, and I might have to find that for you. But it's just wonderful, super talented individual also.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah. But, and then they came up with the logo too. And it was just a great season. We ended up going to nationals that year. That was the year, I believe, that we got Anna Hagstrom
Mhm.
to come. I think she had been playing co-ed, but she then decided to come over and play. I'm trying to think. I think that's right. Is that right? You might have to strike that. No, I can't remember. Now I'm getting it all mixed up. But anyway, a bunch of really fun, great players. And that was the beginning of Pop. Super fun season. Finished that season, I can't remember. I think that might have been the best Minnesota women's team finish. I think that was 13th.
Okay.
I think that was 13th. Maybe it was 11th. It might have been 11th, actually. Which, you keep trying to fight for that better finish, but it's been a rough go for Minnesota.
But I mean, hey, that's still impressive, and also impressive how many of these dates you're able to memorize with 30 years of ultimate kind of all rattling around in your brain. So you helped create Pop with looks like 4 other women. You said Sarah, BK, and Jill Kiner, and then you
Yep.
play with Pop for the next quite a few years, actually, right?
Yeah. So 2008 was the first year. Now, of course, Pop still exists to this day.
Mhm.
And I think my last season was in 2015. And that includes the 1 year in 2011 when I had my second child. I had decided the fall in 2010, we finished played at nationals, we finished the last game, and I'm somewhat tearful knowing that I'd made my own personal decision that this was it and I was done with Ultimate. I was retiring. But, I was going to have another child because we decided to have another child. And lo and behold, it worked out. I did, get pregnant. And then in the springtime, well, I really, missed Ultimate, and I just wanted to see all these fun people. And so for that summer or that season, it was Sarah Weeks and Britt. What's Britt's last name? I should know this.
Oh, Gardner.
Gardner. Okay, yeah, that's what I thought. Sorry. So it was Sarah Weeks, Sana Beeks, and Britt Gardner. were captaining. And I basically just asked if it's okay if I just, show up at practices and, not sure what I'll do, but, if you need numbers, I can practice with you guys. And they said, sure, sure, sure. So it was a very big change in the roster. A lot of new people, a lot of people from the U of M, very warm, fun people. And so I just kept showing up and kept practicing all the way through the spring and then in the summer. And about 7 months pregnant, I was covering Emily Regan, which is ridiculous even under non-pregnant conditions. And I pulled my groin.
Oh.
And then I went and did a track practice and, just a track workout on my own. Because, of course, if you think it hurts, well, you better see if it actually really hurts.
Yeah.
And so then I got in the car after that track practice. And then when I could barely get out of the car when I got home. So I sat out the last 2 months and did not practice, but I would just show up and sit on the blanket and watch them. And, it's just great to see people.
Mm-hmm.
And then our second child was born August 5th. And of course, second kids are a lot easier in terms of recovery. So I showed up 10 days later at practice and, I was like, hey, if you guys need practice players. And then we started talking about playing in the Chicago tournament. So I think that was like at 4 weeks after Pearl was born, and played a tournament. And, I just thought it was really funny that these people didn't seem to mind having me come and play with them because they didn't seem upset about it at all.
Mm-hmm.
And so then I just ended up playing that season too. And it was really fun. And again, the warmth that my teammates have and just the kind of people they are, I think that, again, it's always what draws me back in. It's hard to leave it, which is why I still really actually haven't left Ultimate, even though I thought I have multiple times.
Right. So you finished playing with Pop in 2015, but you're right, that's not the end of Ultimate for you. What happened after Pop?
So then we got a team together just to play Masters, women's Masters. And that was a team called Last Bite. And I think I might have convinced Sarah Weeks to captain that team along with Megan Multeney, and just got a bunch of people together, kind of cobbled people together, some from out of state, others who were, in state. And that was a tournament in Blaine where I think it was 90 degrees and very humid and very windy.
Mm-hmm.
And we didn't have a lot of players, but we did have players who, for instance, Anna Hagstrom, that if we turned the disc over and we were going upwind, it didn't matter if it was going to take us 45 minutes to score a point. We kept working until we scored that point, and we did that all day Saturday. And by the time we got to Sunday, pretty much no one could move. So we lost, the other teams that we lost to are very talented as well. But I think it made it a very decided defeat, both by the Cougars and I think the Pumas, and then Mint from Canada. So that was my one solo strive in women's Masters, and then that team was done.
Okay. Then after that team, though, you did end up going and playing with the Cougars.
That's right. Yeah, even during the 2016 season, Missy Claudia had already, been talking to a number of us, including myself, about really wanting to put a team together that's really a community team and build the women's Masters community in the cities. And so even that season, at the 2016 season, my thought process was the Cougars has a full roster of people. They've been teammates, and then we would have another full roster of people for another team. So kind of not wanting to interfere with what it was that the Cougars already had. But then after the 2016 season, Missy is Missy, and she is very good at being able to reach out and build this community. And so I talked with a couple other people, and then over the winter met with Alicia Carr and Erin Francis, and then Missy. And they were just very enthusiastic about getting this going, and also were very consistent about talking about what it was that they wanted for the Cougars and what that meant to them, and that it's really not just throwing a team together to try and win some tournament. It was about trying to bring as many women into the Minnesota women's community as possible and building as many teams as we could make and having that be a very open, fluid, supportive group. And I was very impressed then and continue to be very impressed and still am by all the work that they did throughout the 2017 season, 2018 season. They're very committed to that. And it's such a great thing for Ultimate. And it's not an easy thing to do because it takes a lot of extra work to be able to keep the doors open and inclusive. But that's exactly what they did.
Yeah. So how long did you play with the Cougars?
So 2017, 2018, and 2019. Yes, that's right. 2019 seems like a long time ago.
Yes, yeah, it does. And then any highlights from those seasons with the Cougars that you want to talk about?
I think 2017 Nationals was clearly a highlight. It's, playing for over 30 years of Ultimate, and I've never, other than regionals, I've never gotten into a finals, never even gotten into the finals. And then to actually win it, I still is magical to me. And I think even more magical because it was such a true team effort. The O-line and the D-line, everybody contributed to that entire tournament, and everybody contributed in the finals, in the game to win. And if we had not had each player be able to step up and really play that well, we wouldn't have been able to do that. I think there's so many of the players, it's probably the best game I've ever seen them play. And that was the finals. And then there are other games all the way along the way. And I think what was so interesting is I suspect, I don't know, I didn't really have any expectations for the season. I just had no idea. I don't know if other people really kind of saw this coming or expected it. But it was fun for me because I could just show up and each game, each point, just work hard, do my best. But what I do think is really remarkable about that group is I remember on Sunday morning eating breakfast at the hotel beforehand, and people were kind of quiet. And I thought to myself, I think people are a little nervous about this. And it wasn't that I wasn't nervous, but for me, the big difference was I knew that I was not alone on that field.
Mm-hmm.
I knew that all these people around me were going to help me and I was going to help them. I did not know what the outcome was going to be, but I knew that I wasn't alone. And so there was this kind of joy, I think, in knowing that. And also a little bit of me maybe feeling like a old player in the sense of me thinking, I bet these guys don't know that. They don't really know that they're not out there alone. But that's, again, the mark of that kind of a team and how rare it is to find a team that is that cohesive. Just remarkable. I still get excited just thinking about it.
Yeah, for sure. I was on the sidelines that whole tournament with my 3-month-old, and I think the word magical is the best way to describe the whole tournament. But the last two games in particular, that comes to mind. There was an incredible energy on the sidelines and throughout the whole game. And still remember after that last point was scored. Yeah, very, very fun to at least be on the sidelines for, and not, I'm sure it was great being a part of it as well.
Yep, absolutely.
So you're with the Cougars in 2019. 2020 happens, and next year is 2021. If there's any sort of ultimate in 2021. Would you have any plans with that? You've said you've retired multiple times and came back. I mean,
Yeah, I think I really like what Alicia and Aaron and Missy have worked for, which is trying to build a community. And I think what I would like to do is participate in a way that continues to build that community. And if that's a Grandmasters team, if that's some other way to support the Cougars for Masters, I'm not sure exactly what that will be. I just know that I want to be a part of Ultimate, and I'm open to whatever works the best, basically, for the community. So I'm not quite sure, but I think that's part of the fun is that you never quite know what the future is going to hold, and certainly with Ultimate, that's what kind of keeps you going. But I guess the one thing is I don't think I'm ever going to be able to say when will actually be my last day of playing Ultimate.
yeah. Well, hopefully, whatever happens, hopefully something can happen in 2021 with some Ultimate, and hopefully it all works out for you. So
Yeah.
I have 2 more questions here to kind of finish things out. You've played Ultimate for 30 plus years now. I'm curious, it doesn't have to be a big change, but what's one change that sticks out in your mind, just in Ultimate in general, from back when you started playing to what you've experienced here in the last few years?
Well, I think one, which is pretty obvious, is just that Ultimate is so well developed in Minnesota that it's players are in high school and are playing on club teams, and their skill level has gone up so much that it's much more competitive. And I think it's very fun to watch. I feel a little bit bad, I think, for all the people who you used to be able to recruit them even when they're in their mid-20s and say, hey, we think you'd be really good. It's a little bit harder, I think, to do that. You really have to be able to have an opportunity to kind of work into that skill set at an earlier age. I think that's one thing. I think the other thing is, and I think this has more to do with, again, the era that we're in now, but the kind of amount of respect I think that there is for women's Ultimate has grown a lot. And I think my eyes were open to that too with the Cougars, in that we had discussions about, equity in the game. And my initial response to that was, well, why would you expect that? And I realized it's because I didn't ever expect it, because it's so different now for girls growing up in sports. They have Serena Williams, they have Megan Rapinoe, they have all of these great female athletes who are just as admired, if not more, and respected as any other athletes. And so I think that there is a kind of not a lack of, I think that girls just grow up knowing that they're a good Ultimate player and they're good in the same way that the guys are good. And they don't even recognize their gender terribly much, which I think is a really great thing. Especially having 2 daughters, that makes me really happy.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's the direction that sports is moving in. So, yeah.
Well, that's good to hear for sure. Last question to close things out. I'm kind of putting you on the spot, so I apologize in advance. But is there anybody that you want to thank or give a shout out to that has been helpful, meant a lot over the last 30 years or so of Ultimate for you?
There's a lot of people.
I'm sure.
I think my first one is Michelle Boardman, aka Rosie. We started playing Ultimate together freshman year, We have been kind of through Ultimate in many different teams, many different forms. And as someone who is able to give you honest feedback and yet be the most supportive, encouraging person ever. Nancy Glass, you just can't set a better example for a fierce competitor who clearly demonstrated to me that you can be a mom, you can be a wife, and you can be a great Ultimate player. Those things are not exclusive. I think those are the two that I have to kind of give the shout out to.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Well, Robin, I can't thank you enough for sitting down and sharing 30 plus years of your Ultimate experience with me and anybody else listening out there. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening. The History of Ultimate in Minnesota podcast is a project run by volunteers, hoping to spotlight amazing stories of Ultimate in Minnesota. If you are interested in helping out, please visit minnesotaultimate.org. A huge thanks for this episode goes out to Robin Kunze for the interview, Minnesota Ultimate, and discdish.org. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time with more history of Ultimate in Minnesota.